Hi, welcome. I hope again to my Deuze vlog. My name is Mark Deuze. I'm a professor of media studies at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And I'm welcoming you to one of a series of extensive conversations I'm recording throughout 2025 and beyond with media professionals as well as scholars and academics who are active in the field of health and well-being in the cultural, creative, and media sectors. And today I'm sitting down with Andy Wright. Andy is works in advertising and marketing in Australia. He is the founder of a project management for creative business company called Streamtime, as well as in 2018 founding the creative community Never Not Creative, an organization that together with other organizations in Australia, such as Everymind and Unlimited, advocates for and engages in all kinds of projects and services, as well as fundamental research on issues related to health and well-being in the media sector. Um, in our conversation, Annie and I talk about, um, well, in a very fundamental level, that it is totally possible to be passionate about the work, to push yourself and your colleagues to great lengths to do an incredible job, to be at your very, very best, and still be happy and healthy at work, right? So there's no necessary contradiction between being happy and relaxed and healthy at work and being at the top of your game, at the cutting edge, pushing it, taking risks, and working hard. And then healthy work, being doing your very best, being your very best, is somewhere in between and requires a very skilled and deliberate and mentally healthy way of working. And that's what he advocates for, what he promotes. Never Not Creative offers a wide range of projects and services, the asking for a friend database of support, a support line, mentoring for people of color in the media marketing and creative industries in Australia, and so on and so forth. I really hope that you enjoy checking us, checking our conversation out, as well as all the other conversations in this series. They can all be found on YouTube, on Spotify, and of course through my Substack online newsletter. Please follow, like, subscribe, comment, shoot me an email. I would love to continue the conversation.
Do you want me to just start with I saw that question around like what led to founding. We can start there if you like, and then that'll lead into some of the research. Do you want to do that?
I think that would be lovely if you can kick us off with, because in a weird way, you and Ben actually are some of the pioneers that I found internationally, and still, it's only what 6, 7 years ago maybe, but I mean, among the first to really start engaging with all of this in a structured way. So yeah, if you can take us through that, like what led you to Never Not Creative and Streamtime.
Yeah, so I've worked in agencies, so creative agencies, so design, branding, advertising, for most of my life, or marketing. And when I moved to Australia, that's when I really kind of got into agencies, and that was back in 2006. Um, and I think like what I'd seen across the time was different kinds of cultures in agencies, and that, you'll hear agencies always talk about it's all about the work. And that's what comes first, right? Everything else comes second, even to the point of profitability and well-being, and everything comes second to the work. And as a result, that creates cultures that are fairly unrelenting, right? Like you
Mm.
are often having to put things off or stay behind or whatever it might be to like put life on hold for the work. And I'd seen a number of things over the years. I'd seen people be like physically ill as a result of what they were experiencing at work, taking time off and then coming back and being put into exactly the same situation. I remember being awarded one of those, I think it was 40 under 40 or 30 under 30 awards.
All right.
And one of the quotes from a colleague was, "Oh, I've never seen someone send so many emails after midnight." And I look back at that now and I go, what a douche. Like all I did was set up expectations that if you want to be successful, you've got to be working that hard.
Mm.
Um, and so it's one of those things where that kind of culture that's kind of very unforgiving and unrelenting leads to poor mental health. And for me, eventually, having even being able to kind of start my own agency with a couple of co-founders, I got to the point where I was then diagnosed with anxiety and depression.
Mm.
And I thought a smart way of dealing with it at the time was to talk about it. And I'd been asked to come and do a talk for Creative Mornings, which is this big kind of like community worldwide, and every month in lots of different cities, there's a talk by a local creative, and you're given a theme which is set globally. And the theme that I was given was risk. And I thought, okay, well, nothing more risky than suddenly coming out and talking about my own mental health to everyone. So I did a presentation around anxiety and depression and what I'd found out about it so far. And I'd probably only been diagnosed about 8 weeks before. So I
Wow.
hadn't found a lot about it, to be honest.
Mm.
And I guess that was probably the big first moment when I realized what was and wasn't going on when it came to mental health in my industry. And I received a very mixed response. I got a great response from some people who came up afterwards and said, "Hey, thanks so much for sharing. I've been feeling the same way. I'm glad someone's finally talking about it." And then I got absolute silence and crickets from, other people who were very, very close to me and who, I would work with every day, for example.
Mm.
And it felt like, oh, well, like I actually regretted talking about it. And now I'm at the point where I go, well, you know what? Sometimes people aren't ready for that. I was on a journey. It doesn't mean everybody else was on that journey. And so, like, how you talk about it and how you think about it and how you express yourself about it can make a really big difference to how it's received.
Mm.
So it got to the point where I left the agency. The way I got to Streamtime, which is a project management software tool for creative businesses, is that my agency designed the new product for them. And so I'd started working with them for a while. The beauty was it was kind of a brief that was like design something you would use. And so their target audience was, myself and agencies like us at the time. And I'd worked with them for a couple of years. And as I was kind of really struggling, the founder said, "Hey, do you want to come and run my business?" And I'd never run a software business before. And I certainly didn't make the decision straight away, but in the end, I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll give that a go." And what it gave me was headspace, right? Like I was out the agency world. We have things like recurring revenue, which agencies, always fighting for the next project,
Right.
always 12 weeks, 6 to 12 weeks from going out of business because you don't know what's coming around the corner. Whereas we had people paying subscriptions. And so that just takes the pressure off, is a different dynamic. There are other pressures, of course. And the other thing that influenced where I got to, I think, was the last year of working for the people. I worked with the Australian Workers Union, and I went full socialist. I went to like socialism conferences. Absolutely loved it. I came back, um, and realized that I didn't want like perpetual struggle necessarily in my life.
Right.
And but what I did learn was like the rights of workers and how life shouldn't be compromised for work and what conditions and what things should be in place to allow that to happen better. So that and the kind of mental health experience led to the idea of Never Not Creative, which was, well, can I pull these two things together and can I use them to try and give back? Like, I don't think I could boil the ocean and sort out mental health of the world, but if I know enough about it and some relatable stuff about it when it comes to the industry, then maybe that's where I can start. So it started as a like a community project, really. And when I heard about, I actually went to a conference and I saw someone deliver some research around the mental health of small businesses in Australia. It was her name was Jaylee Skian, who was a director at Everymind. And I went to her at the end of this conference and I said, "Hey, do you think we could adapt this for the creative industry?" She said yes. We got on with it. Another industry partner came on board, Unlimited, and we did this research study. And to be honest, the biggest thing about the research was that it, like more than 2,000 people participated, which
Right.
in itself was like, well, wait a minute. Yes, we've stumbled upon something here, haven't we? Like, this is an issue. The fact that so many people want to have their say about it. And then from there, it's just, yeah, it's snowballed. Like today, Never Not Creative is now a charity, registered charity.
Mhm.
And yeah, we're doing way too much for the time that we have, but we're it's certainly getting through quite a few things.
Yeah, because it's I mean the two things I do want to talk about all the things that Never Not Creative that you're doing because it's like you said, it's a lot and it's quite amazing to see and you keep adding on these amazing new projects. But maybe just circling back a little bit to what you just said, I mean, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but one theme that I'm really picking up on conversations with people such as yourself, practitioners around the world who've become advocates for health and well-being in creative environments, whether that's film or journalism or advertising or whatnot, it often took them a personal tragedy or trauma to sort of like you would almost say wake up and smell the roses, right? And like you said, you know, you got your diagnosis, you got this unique client that sort of sharpened your perspective. I mean, looking back on that now, because again, we're talking about 6, 7 years ago. Like, how do you look back on that? Like, is it good in a way? And I'm not saying depression or anxiety is good, but to have had that moment, or is it actually a symptom of something that is deeply concerning? That is what it takes. That's how deep we are all invested in this thing.
I think anything that is sort of activist or movement led has to come from lived experience,
Mm,
right? Like there has to be something inside that
mm,
it means enough to you that you want to do something about it. I find this, and obviously I don't have this lived experience, but there's a great book called The Wake Up.
right.
Um, I've completely forgotten the author, which is terrible, but she will find it. She writes about gender equality
Mm,
and not, well, actually more than gender equality, inclusion and diversity overall. So she's a gay Korean American woman, and she talks about how lived experience is so important to creating change. And the reason for that being that if at some point you're going to be asked to compromise when you're trying to create change, right? There is something that you're going to try and achieve everything for the greater good for people outside of like of you in your space. But then there will come a point where you will have to make a decision as to how far you want to go and whether you will compromise or not. And that's why some change doesn't happen in that diversity and inclusion area, is because, there's people who think, well, wait a minute, as a white male, for example, am I actually going to miss out here? Am I not
mm,
going to get opportunities? Which are things that people have been missing out on for generations. But suddenly you've got to go, well, how far am I willing to go? And so that's where I think lived experience comes in, is that, well, if you've personally felt it, then you're able to relate. You're able to kind of go, well, this, like, I don't want other people to feel this.
right.
And you can try and push, you can try and empathize, and you can try and get as close to it as you can, but it's not the same as living it. The beauty with mental health is that, well, look, in our industry, more than half of people have had some sort of experience with a negative mental health outcome.
Right.
So it does make it a little bit easier to try and create change from that perspective.
Yeah, it's similar to one of the interviews in this series is with somebody you know quite well, Ben Steele of Screenwell, who talks about his assessment of why this topic is now becoming more okay to talk about is because more people have skin in the game. That's what he's like, that actual experience and an awareness like this ain't right, and that makes it authentic and real. That's so true. Um, and so you had that experience, then conducting the survey. I mean, like you said, the participation in these surveys in and of itself is quite astounding. In all these industries, I find that the level of participation, the number of respondents in the thousands, in the tens of thousands, sometimes it's truly remarkable. Saying that as a researcher, when I put out research and nobody, I hear crickets. So that's powerful in and of itself. The numbers, of course, quite shocking. As you say, the majority of people have had negative experiences related to health and well-being because of things at work. Um, and so never not creative coming from that set of experiences and actions now has, lack of a better term, mushroomed into a whole series of activities. I mean, you run a support line, you still do the research. I mean, the new latest research came out last year. You have, podcasts, you do mentoring for people of color in the industry. You have this, which I really love, these gatherings asking for a friend.
And yeah,
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 would you mind sort of talking a little bit about, you don't have to describe all of them because we're definitely going to list them, of course, in
yeah.
in in, in the blog, but how, about some of these activities?
Yeah, so I guess where they came from is that as soon as you talk about mental health, it very quickly gets into very cliched, obvious mental health stuff, right? So mindfulness, meditation, yoga, journaling, like they're all really good things.
Sure.
But they are like a coping mechanism, right? Like they're like
Mm.
things that will help ground me, the things that help me get through something. Where we focus most is more on the systemic side of things. So, from that perspective, it's like, what are the things that are causing poor mental health outcomes in our industry?
Right.
One of those is definitely around education, stigma, and that kind of stuff. So there is a kind of direct mental health element,
Hmm.
but then there is also, have we created the conditions for people to be able to thrive? So for people who are not white, male, cisgendered, then do you feel like you can belong in this industry? And if you don't feel like you belong and you're turning up to work every day and having to hide a part of yourself, well, then that has a poor mental health outcome. Then there is financial side of things. Like people are graduating to get into this industry and not able to get a job. And so, like, what can we do to support those people? Which is a program we launched last year called Never Not Finishing School. And
Yeah.
so we kind of try and plug that gap. Then there's other diversity and inclusion work around Never Not International Women's Day. Um, and I guess so overall, like what we are trying to look at is how can we create an industry that is still all about performance, but recognizes that we have to look out for people if they're going to be able to perform. I always kind of take it. I used to do this presentation where I have this slide of a footballer, English footballer called Kieran Trippier, and
All
it's just
right.
a gif of someone like massaging him on the pitch right up to his buttocks. And it's quite confronting, but it's like you want Kieran Trippier to play as his absolute best, and that's the lengths you'll go. And you'll probably stick him in like a cryo chamber after the game, and everything gets into like put into performance, right? And the work in that instance is essentially being able to play your best on the field. In our industry, we don't do anything near that to look after the things that people need to be able to do their best job, which is their brains and
Mm.
their confidence and their self-esteem and their feeling that they can express themselves or have ideas without being shot down. And so we don't create the environment well enough for those people to be able to perform. And so if we can improve things like here's how to prepare yourself for your first job, or here's how to find people like you and find a bit of a community and to start to share things that allow you to find belonging in this industry and to educate others in doing that. Here's how to create psychologically safe workplaces so that people can be themselves. Here's how to understand neurodiversity better. When one in five at least, are showing some sort of form of neurodiversity.
Right.
And that's not people going, oh God, I can't give this person a brief because they just don't do that work very well. Or, they went into too much detail. Why can't they just, move on and come up with an idea? Like all things that you haven't, that's not them. You just haven't worked out how to get the best out of them.
Mm.
And so, if we don't understand that, then we actually are going to miss out on a whole bunch of talent that could perform really well in our industry. So, yeah, a lot of these things and initiatives come from that kind of systemic view. There are also things that we've noticed, and we're like, well, there's nothing stopping us from doing this, like the support line.
Mm.
So, if there are things at the extreme level of psychologically unsafe, such as harassment, sexual abuse, bullying, discrimination, we put together a helpline where you get your first call with a lawyer for free to understand what your rights are. And to be honest, it was just a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't we do that? But it wasn't a new idea, but it had been discarded by a few other organizations previously. Asking for a friend is very much that recognition of it's still a bit hard to talk about this stuff at work. Like if I bring up one of the most frequent questions we'll get is, how do I talk about my mental health at work? Because what you're worried about is, well, if I disclose something, am I now not going to get a promotion? Am I now not going to get an opportunity on the next brief? Am I going to kind of
Right.
get ostracized and managed out? And so these are all sorts of things that like you can ask anonymously in a safe environment to a psychologist and a creative leader. So you get kind of the career aspect of it and you get the mental health aspect of it. And we've been running that now for 4 years, I
Mm.
think,
Mm.
every month. And the library of content I've got is really quite amazing. So we're turning it into, I'm trying at the moment to turn it into like a chat bot type thing that will you can just
Right.
query it,
Yeah.
and just take all of that content.
And one thing that you said about, managing people so that they can perform at their very best, which takes into account their humanity. That's basically what we're talking about, and enables them also to be actually creative in a creative industry. I'm just reminded, I mean, I was just reading today the new State of Creativity report, I think from the Lions organization, and they say, oh, the big problem in advertising is cultural inertia, and agencies are not taking risks anymore, and companies, only 13% of companies describe themselves as risk friendly. And I was reading all of that and I think, well, if you want creative people to take risks, they have to feel safe doing so. And what your work and your research unequivocally shows is that people don't feel safe. Like you said, they don't feel a sense of belonging. And that's that. I mean, it seems like such a basic, almost common sense appreciation of what is necessary, but still, like you said, I mean, and that's what the research that you like through the mentally healthy organization consistently find people still saying taboo stigma to talk about these issues work is still a structural issue. How have you seen any movement on that area since the first big survey in 2018? We got 2024's reports. I mean, all the activities that you're now deploying. I mean, it is the yeah. I mean, how normal has that conversation or abnormal become?
I would say it's definitely improved. So
Mm.
from a cultural perspective, it has improved. The gap between leaders' intentions and employees' experiences has definitely closed, right? So people recognize that, leaders are doing a much better job of saying, hey, this is important and it's a priority. There's still some room to get across around turning that into an experience for an employee. Um, and I think one of the biggest things that will help close that gap is how leaders pass on autonomy and training and education to managers. So there's this whole section of people that are trapped in the middle, right? They feel like they have to deliver for their bosses And that's when it comes to profitability, productivity, hitting deadlines, that kind of stuff. They do care about the people doing the work, right? And but at the same time, they're just stuck in the middle because they've got to take on another project because we don't have enough money in the pipeline this month. And the clients kind of said, well, I need this by Monday, right? And so they go, well, we need that. We're going to have to do it. Hey, I'm sorry, but can you come in on the weekend and can you do this? Now, that used to be really, really bad. It's definitely not as bad,
Mm,
those kind of asks, but it still exists. And if, as a leader, you want that intention to turn into reality, you have to do so much more work with your managers. So the next level down to be able to help the team manage their work, feel safe, feel confident, be able to make a mistake, and be able to be better off and having learned for it. Be able to protect the people that have got to do the work. Be able to say no.
mm,
Like even if something is, it might annoy a client. Some people are so scared of saying no that it actually impacts on everybody else's health. But actually, sometimes when you say no to a client, they turn around and go, "Oh, okay, when can you do it by?"
mm,
And it's this kind of like there's so much in the kind of ether of second guessing in our industry, right? It's a service-based industry. Oh, if we don't do this, the client will say this. If we don't do this, someone else, this will happen. But you don't know until you do it. And so you're making decisions that are impacting people based on something that isn't necessarily true. And if you can train and help people to kind of go, well, how do you overcome that? And give them permission to say no now and again, you'll find that relationship can balance out a little bit better. And you'll find that the outcomes can be a little bit better as well. There's a whole bunch more to it, obviously, but
mm.
that I think is what sometimes obstructs the gap between leaders and the rest of the people in their business.
And I really appreciate you bringing up leaders and the role of middle management and people taking on positions of power and responsibility in agencies and studios. I mean, a project that you were involved in that really was eye-opening for me was the 2023 Different Shoes project, right? This is study on the significance of empathy in agency management and leadership. And this striking result that pretty much everybody in the survey said, yeah, empathy is super important, right? Well over 80% said, yeah, but not seeing it. And
Mm.
partly because, and that's what you just said to me, sort of resonates this, that the metrics that are used in these companies are all client focused. They're actually not about, do people feel good about the work? Are people feel seen? Do people feel okay to take risks creatively or otherwise? And I saw you posted the other day and a reflection on that report, which was from 2023, based on this New York Times report on the dark side of empathy, right? What happens when we have empathic systems but no accountability and no moral compass to evaluate them, right? So we can all be incredibly empathic, but then nothing happens, and
Yeah.
that can
Also,
be
it's a
really
scary concept. So actually, the guy who wrote that article, Michael Ventura, we were on a panel together in Melbourne a couple of years ago,
right.
and he also, and I think I mentioned in the post that someone warned me once around just be careful about how you approach empathy,
Mm,
because if you teach, people who will put themselves always above others how to do empathy, then you're giving them a really like weaponized tool to be able to manipulate and to create poor outcomes for other people
mm,
because of how you can get them to do things because you can show empathy but not actually deliver it. And it was quite scary, but as you reference, like the biggest thing that we always find in the research is that empathy and a better kind of educated leader is what people want to be able to see to improve mental well-being in their business. And that comes back to that point that we talked about right at the start, which is lived experience.
mm,
If you can understand that, and if you've actually lived it and you felt it, you are naturally going to be more empathetic. You are going to be able to understand what other people are going through. Um, I've talked often about doing the mental health first aid course. And it was probably one of the best leadership courses I've ever done because it just stops you from thinking about yourself and what you're trying to achieve. And it gets you to think about other people's actions and what they might be going through. And like, if that's a great starting point, like if you can just think about that and think about, well, wait a minute, they expressed this or they did that. Did they do that because they didn't care about you? Did they do that because they don't give a shit about the business? No, there's
Mm.
probably another reason for that. So try and get in and understand it with them. It's the same for neurodiversity. Like if you can try and you're not going to necessarily be able to empathize immediately, but if you can try and understand better what people are going through, how they react, then you're going to be able to get the best out of them. And that doesn't matter if it's neurodivergence, that's just anyone and a personality, right?
Mm.
And a motivator, what motivates people. And if you can understand that stuff better, then you'll get better results out of them. So yeah, I find that a lot of that stuff is really it's probably easy to understand. It's hard to execute, right? Like I think Brene Brown's the most famous quote around empathy, which is it's the first thing we want to see in somebody else, but it's the last thing we'll give up ourselves.
Right.
And it's true. Like, and for all of us, including me, there'll be times when I'll be having a bad day, and I go, do I share this? And sometimes I will because I want to make the point of sharing and being letting other people know. Um, and then there's other times when I just go, well, I actually don't feel like sharing that today.
Mm.
And I'll get through it and I'll see how I'm doing tomorrow. And it's very hard to get that kind of feeling right.
How do you, because look, I mean, we can look at the data and your own experience and experience of fellow colleagues in this field and say, look, health and well-being is a really significant issue in a creative field, and we need to address it and all that. But then there's still quite a few people who will push back against that. It's like, but that's either they find the whole health and well-being debate a bit self-indulgent, right? Or they lack the sort of emotional literacy to really engage with that. Or they can't see it. They find it hard to see it. And then of course there's still the remaining issue of taboo or stigma around it. One thing that I found really helpful in conversations and what I've picked up from colleagues in this area is that to make the conversation not about, and that's why I'm asking you, because your comment just now reminded me of that it's not always about yourself and realizing your own issues and struggles and whatnot, but also appreciating that somebody else, a colleague or somebody, a newcomer or somebody in some kind of vulnerable position, that they might be struggling, and to be able to see and listen to that and hold space for that. I mean, that seems to be quite a powerful element to all of this. Does that resonate with you and the work that Never Not Creative is doing?
Yeah, definitely. And I think going back to that point around most people coming into this industry are told it's all about the work,
Mm.
right? So therefore, the people get put to the side, right? Like that's why those things are happening. I've heard a number of people tell me how they might go and approach their manager or a boss and say, "Hey, I'm struggling. Like, is this going to calm down at any point?" And they'll turn around and go, "No, this is what it's like. Maybe it's not for you."
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not, I mean, that's not okay. That's not an okay answer. But at the same time, that answer is probably coming from someone who was never taught how to manage people, right?
Mm.
So this
Yeah.
industry does a great job of creating a ladder of different hierarchies and roles. And sometimes those things are used literally just to keep people in the business, right? Oh, you're going to leave. Oh, how about we give you a promotion? Or someone really wants a promotion because they've seen that that's the next stage on the ladder and they saw that their mate got one. And so they should be at that level. Okay, well, then they get given a promotion. But do they know what the difference between where they've come from and where they are now or where they're going? And has anybody ever shown them that? What does it mean? Like the higher you get up the ladder, the less it is about you. And
Mm.
people don't like you often use it as a way of saying, well, I've achieved something and I'm achieving and I'm achieving. It's all about me. But it's not. The higher you get, the less it is about you. And so the more you've got to put on in helping other people. And people aren't taught that. There's very little training in our industry around anything to do with management.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
what you get is people who are incredibly skilled and talented now being given a team. And if people aren't doing things the way that they did them, it's very hard for them to see, how to improve or whether anything is any good. So that makes a huge difference, I think, in terms of how equipped the industry is to be able to create an environment where people can feel supported. I think the other part is that there is a bit of a backlash to mental health at work, and it is that it's people going, well, we've talked about this for a while now. What's next?
Right.
We've done that. We've got an EAP, an employee assistance program.
Right.
We've got an employee survey. We do yoga on a Thursday. Like the mental health box is ticked. Let's move on.
Yeah.
And I think the other part then that they're afraid of is that in Australia, we've got legislation now around psychosocial safety, right?
Right.
Like, so if you get this wrong, your company can be fined, directors of the company can be put in jail. Like, that's how far it can go. But it's not meant for that. It's meant to create better working environments. And I think there's this feeling with some leadership that we have to tread on eggshells. We're not allowed to push our people. And that's actually the thing that probably needs debunking,
Right.
right? Which
Yeah.
you're still running a business. You can still push people. There are still ups and downs in this industry. You are still going to get a brief on a Friday. You are still going to ask to turn a pitch round in a week. There are highs and lows. How you react and how you help support people through that and how you find them respite during, after, then that's how you can win. But you don't have to say you can't, I'm not allowed to push you to perform. You can. It's a business. You've got to get a commercial outcome from this for the business to continue, to pay them to, it's literally hierarchy of needs, right?
Mm.
And so the piece that I think can be done better is to go, well, here's how you can drive your people to perform, but here's how to look after them along the way.
Well,
Here's
doing.
how to support them to be their best. Not assume that you're not allowed to ask things of them because now these laws exist, or, oh, it's mental health. I'm not allowed to ask you to come to do a little extra work or to push you into something a bit more challenging. Um, and it's often the way leaders might approach sometimes disclosure of mental health, which is, with all the best intentions, they want to fix someone. So they go, well, I'm not going to give you give that person that piece of work because I'll be pushing them too far. Well, guess what? Like all you did is you just told them they weren't good enough. So they don't get opportunities. And so actually their mental health drops and, they fall into whatever diagnosis that they might end up in because they don't feel worthy and they don't feel like they're valued and they don't feel like they're achieving anything. So it's I mean, it's bloody hard, isn't it? Like it's such a fine line. There's all these things to navigate, but it's okay to push, but just support them even better to be able to do that work.
How do you engage with or the discussion or prevent? Because one thing that I've picked up from the work and the research that you've done in the past, and that is corroborated by similar research by the World Federation of Advertising, by NABS in the UK, for example, among agency professionals, is that I mean, a slightly growing number of people acknowledge like, yeah, there's a beginning of a discussion around health and well-being, and I've got managers who are actually beginning to open up, or who are genuinely, who want to do better. But then those same studies suggest that people say, yeah, but what then ends up happening in agencies are like box ticking exercises, a bit similar to what you said earlier. We've talked about this for a while now. Let's move on. Let's talk about AI or, software or whatever, something like that. Let's go to the bar and complain about clients, and that's it. How do you move this from a box ticking exercise to an actually structural change, like a cultural, I guess that's what we're talking about, a cultural change here.
Yeah, I believe that what we've done a really good job of shining a light on it, but as a result, we've done a really good job of, in a way, separating it out as a thing, right?
Mm,
And so when you separate it out as a thing, that's when it can become a box ticking exercise. Oh, mental health, done it. I liken it to, the movement when people had bad backs at work, and so you had to have these like ergonomic tests and checks
right.
at your workstation, right? Same sort of thing. All right, we've done that. We've given them a desk and we've given them a chair, and everything should be fine. Um, I think what we need to do is get much closer to the things that are causing these outcomes, which is
Yeah.
the way that we work.
Mm,
And if you make it about the work, well, then wait a minute. Agencies and leaders have got a vested interest in that. If we say that, look, hey, we can get you better work, we can get you better outcomes, we can get you better performance by improving the mental capacity and the positivity of your team, like, wouldn't you want that? And because that's, and this is something that when we first did the research, I remember working with someone on a business case for better mental well-being in the industry. And they said, well, let's just show them how much money they're losing. Let's show them like how much money they could make. And actually, funnily enough, in this industry, because it's not brilliantly commercial, right? Like usually it's people that just love doing the work, starting businesses, and then going to shit, how do we make money?
mm,
And they do make money, but they kind of like they wobble along and they manage to do it and they never quite go out of business, but they never quite get to the point where it's like back in the old days where we're just having parties and going out for lunch on a Friday and never coming back.
mm,
Um, so how do you take getting better work and getting better out of people and delivering a positive outcome for people's mental well-being? So this is where I get to like turn on the other hat, if you like, which is, Streamtime as a business is a business that understands the work that these agencies are doing. So, with Streamtime, you can put in you'll get a brief from a client. You'll create the job plan to do the work. You'll quote it. You'll schedule the team. You'll report on how well the job is going. You'll invoice it. All of that data sits in one place. So we know a lot about the work. What we also have started to track now is happiness. So, how happy are people in a business when they're doing that kind of work? And where we want to get to is to be able to pull those two things together. The main USP, I guess, is they sit in the same system. It's not a separate exercise, right? So you're actually giving happiness feedback as you go without having to go anywhere else. Um, I think by helping nudge and help giving insights and showing, look, these people love doing this type of work. These people, when teamed with these people, always or 90% of the time get a great outcome from meeting deadlines and more profitable projects. Um, Throw in an extra metric, which is how good, like even just qualitatively and anecdotally, how good was the work and the outcome of that project? Right. Well, now we've got three things. We've got well-being, we've got work outcome, and we've got profitability or productivity, all sat next to each other.
mm.
There is a relationship between these things. Obviously, there are other metrics within, each of those, but when you put those three together, you've got this kind of Venn diagram of how we can improve the three rather than just, oh, we've got to do an exercise around mental well-being.
Right.
And a lot of it is like it's in research from the Center for, I'm going to forget it, aren't I? Transformative Work Design, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
No, that's stuff. So the smart, we actually use the smart framework in our product around stimulation, mastery, agency, relational support, and tolerable demands. And we track, I've got data in our system that shows by agency how all of those are mapped. Basically, stimulation is really good as an industry marker. Tolerable demands, not so good as an industry
Right.
marker. And then the three in the middle are actually kind of cultural. It's like, how do you run your business? How much autonomy are you giving people? How much support and connection to the work do people feel?
Mm,
Um, and so that makes a huge difference. And how much feedback do they get, right? The mastery part
mm,
of like, do I know what I'm doing and am I doing it well or not? If you can actually just focus on those three things and help people through that whilst they're doing the work, they'll perform even better than what they are doing now.
Right.
And so therefore, like, do we even need to talk about mental health, or do we just talk about helping people do their best and letting the rewards kind of speak for themselves?
Hmm. Yeah, and that would also hopefully tie into getting a wider range of people involved in the creative process, right? Not just the people who manage to survive in the current system, smartly or not, but also people who are now, for whatever reason, are or feel excluded that might participate when work is just better organized.
And I think
Um, yeah,
that would improve, there's things there around like gender equality, which would improve that. Like understanding gender, understanding inclusion, making yourself a better leader to be able to get better out of the people that are working for you is another outcome out of that, right? Like
yeah,
it's all linked, and we don't have to go. Yeah, actually, and this is the hard thing about getting in ed, to be honest, any of the topics we talked about today, one of the hardest things is getting people who look like you and me to engage in these topics,
mm,
right? We weren't taught to do it before. I'm English, white, stiff upper lip, right? Like would never ever have talked to my dad about any of this stuff in the past. Just not brought up like that. And masculinity plays a role in that. Well, guess what? If we can actually create better leaders who look like us and who understand how to support other people, what they might be going through, how they can do their best work, and you call that leadership, and you say, hey, like, wouldn't you like to be a great coach? And I always go back to like the football managers, right? Gone are the days of Alex Ferguson kicking stuff around a dressing room, hair drying people, spraying them, right? That doesn't work anymore.
right.
It's people like Pep, it's people like Jurgen Klopp who are putting their arms around players and saying, okay, how can I help you better? I remember seeing a Jurgen Klopp interview of like, we bring a player in and we watch what they can do and we go, oh, how can we help you do that for us? How can we support you in doing that? And then we might need to shape a little bit to get you to fit with the rest of the team. But on the whole, it's about you and how you fit in. It's not about, this is our way of doing things. And if you don't like it, off you go. And I think you see that in so many things. And so I just gravitate towards football because I love football. But you
Well,
do see it. Styles are changing.
I have to. I mean, I appreciate you bringing in Jurgen Klopp. I of course have to mention Arne Slot because he's Dutch, and but I was reminded of what
Everton fan, so that's
you.
hard for me. But yeah.
Yeah, but like the way British reporters describe the success of this Dutch coach of Liverpool this year, and they say, well, we're not quite sure about him, but he seems to be very warm
Yes.
and the players just like playing with and for him, and that really aligns with what you just said. I mean, so maybe in conclusion, Andy, I mean, one thing that we've talked about before and that really has inspired my work, and I would love for you to talk maybe a little bit more about it. In an earlier conversation, you said, look, from having done this now for a couple of years, right? Advocating for health and well-being in the creative field and talking to people and commissioning the research and doing all this amazing work, you realize that every industry needs to go through a couple of phases to really engage with this. And if I remember correctly, you said, look, it starts with normalizing the discussion. Then you can start talking about maybe standards or policies or protocols. Then, of course, you need to train people. And then only then we can actually start talking about a change of culture, professionalization, where all of this is included. I mean, in a way, those four stages seem to be are they're really useful, and I said like that makes sense. But I've also noticed that if I tell other people about this way of framing the conversation, that they find it depressing and say, like, yeah, but that's going to take a flippant generation. How do you see that evolution of the industry along these lines? I mean, can we do all four at once?
I think it's hard to do all four at once. I mean, so let's also say that kind of four-stage process came from us sharing our research and doing the study for an organization called ICAD
Hmm.
in Ireland, and we found that, and this was last year's research, so 2024,
Hmm.
and we found that their results were much closer to 2018's results than they were to our 24 results. So it wasn't just a world thing, right? Like, we and we've been driving the conversation, and it would not certainly not say that it was all us. There's lots of like great organizations doing work over here,
Hmm.
but we've definitely given it a bit of a nudge. And so it was interesting to see how the results were so similar to what they were experiencing, but back in 2018 for us. And so it was actually them that pointed it out and said, look, what's the blueprint? What do we do from here? I don't want to do what you're doing now. I want to do what you did back in 2018. And it was like, okay, well, maybe we should think about that as a blueprint and as a way of moving forward. Um, I mean, ultimately, it was 2018, and what are we at? 20. I mean, the last research was 2024. So let's say that's six years. It's not too long, and also nobody is doing this for their job, right? Like,
Mm.
unfortunately, that no industry body is paying someone to go and fix these problems. So ultimately, you're doing, I do this. It's late night here. We're doing things in our spare time. Um, and so actually that amount of change across 6 years across evenings and weekends it's not too bad. Um, but there are things I think you can look for markers along the way. One of the biggest things that I regret a little, to be honest, is the definitely the first stage is that destigmatization and normalization that you talked about. Do we have a problem? Let's quantify it. I think what could happen quicker is the training stuff, because what happens is you make everyone aware of it. You say, hey, this is something, and then you very quickly move to, hey, you should be share your story. It'll make things easier. Let people know at work. That's great but you've built up the confidence of one group of people without preparing another group of people to have that conversation. And that's the bit, that was my experience right at the very beginning.
Mm.
If they have, it takes a lot to come out and talk about it. And if you've then put them next to someone that is not ready or who dismisses them or is, invalidating what it is that they're talking about, then you're going to knock that down very, very quickly. You're right. So you're building up confidence and you're knocking it away straight away. So I think those two things actually could go hand in hand, like build the awareness, but actually help people have the conversation at the same time. So get out there early with, and for us over here, it's been the mental health first aid training.
Hmm.
Um, the standards help. You might find actually, like when we wrote the standards, um, they weren't a million miles away from just employment law.
Mm.
And actually, in many territories, these laws already exist.
Right.
It's just the people who run businesses in the creative industry don't go reading employment law. And most people don't know what their rights are, right? But if you
Right.
could quickly elevate that as like, hey, this is your responsibilities, then those three things can kind of go together. Um, and then I think it's going that step further, which is how do you take this about like we've got to stop thinking that the solution to pneumonia is just chucking a tissue at someone, right? Like that's not good enough. That's the kind of box ticking mental health stuff, right? Where
Right.
we're not doing enough to really make a dent in the problem. But if you then train yourself to look at, well, actually, I do want better outcomes and I want to look after my people and I want to be able to make money in doing that. Well, then you start to look at training people professionally, not in mental health necessarily, but in managing, inspiring, creating visions that people can get around. Like, funnily enough, the one thing that the creative industry has
Yes.
spouted that it's amazing at for decades, they are not doing for themselves.
Mm.
Right? Like we want to create inspiring work. We want to create work that moves people. We want to be able to bring people on the journey. We want to create community. Well, okay, let's try doing that in our own businesses. Let's bring everyone along for the ride. Let's realize that what we're selling, we have to sell to them as well,
Mm.
um, and help them come along with us. So yeah, but it's a big problem. So it's not a quick answer. And unfortunately, the hard stuff, which if you can effect gives you the most sense of achievement takes a lot of work and effort. Um, and quite rightly, it should. But I think it can come back to create, like help people improve the output and the work by giving them the support that they need. And that just kind of ticks more boxes in terms of what, our industry has been about forever,
Yeah.
which is the work.
Yeah, I'm I have to laugh because it's so true, right? That for all the creativity and innovation and risk taking and an amazing, inspiring work the industry does, it doesn't tell that story about and to itself. And let me just say, Andy, I mean, it like the research that I'm doing is all of it is based on the work that people like you are doing, right? It's not other academics, generally speaking. It's the industry itself. And I mean, I'm looking at you now. I mean, I have the cool T-shirt and the cap and all the design stuff from Never Not Creative. And the reports, the mentally healthy reports are beautifully formatted. You got a fabulous website, Never Not Creative. I mean, and I see that with a lot of these organizations that, yeah, you can see these are professional storytellers and they care about how the story looks like and sounds like. And of course, it needs to have real valuable content as well. And that makes this message so powerful. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you so much for your time and for this incredible work that you're doing. And yeah, I hope these kind of conversations contribute to a global conversation about this and a normalization of it as well. So,
Yeah,
so, so
definitely.
thanks so much, Andy.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great to chat. Love these conversations. Could chat for hours.